Oh, I can see Leora is recording already.
I see Richard Cleary is with us.
Hi, Richard. Nice to see you here.
Richard, are you there?
Yep, I'm there. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, good.
Wow, interesting background.
Oh, it's a quilt that Sarah made. So it's
Oh, you mean it's the real thing?
no, well, it's a photograph of the real thing. I just put it in as a backdrop, kind of like yours.
I don't know what it is. Mine is just some kind of abstract photo that's a mistake. This is what it is.
Hi,
I
Anthony.
do have several, which I try to change out just to entertain myself.
Hello, Richard.
Yeah.
Nice to see
Happy
you.
to see you. And Leora, who else is there? I saw
Yeah,
Barbara.
Leora seems to have disappeared. Oh no, there she is. So I think we'll get going at around 12:02 maybe.
And there's Alex. Can you hear me, Alex?
I like Anthony's backdrop. It's a good one.
That image is from the Museum of the City of New York, which has wonderful visual holdings of all kinds of things, cultural things, architecture, art, everything. You know, the archives of the City of New York, the municipal archives, were in the World Trade Center, and they were destroyed. They were
I didn't know that they were there. Oh my goodness.
they were incinerated and by the blast. And so so this cache at the New York Public Library has great things, but the Museum of the City of New York now has a major repository that you have to turn to because the municipal archives is gone. All the historic photographs that were saved by the city. It's strange, but.
Oh, I had no idea that those were all lost. Huh. Michael, you need to put in a feed of lunch noises. The crinkling of wrappers, the snarfing of chips. Selections of sounds from the past.
But only the highlights, Richard.
Only the highlights. Empanadas stuck between our teeth.
There actually is I think it's a YouTube. Someone has recorded office sounds, and you can play them in the background. It's like typewriter sounds and coffee maker sounds and people walking by and so on. So that, you can feel at home. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, I'm going to start in about a minute and set things rolling.
Hey, Katie.
Hi.
How are you?
It's nice to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, there's still people coming in. That's great.
You know, Anthony, in Germany, they give a full professor 15 minutes.
Oh, this will be about 15 minutes. So,
All the lectures used to start with the abbreviation CT, cum tempore,
oh, I see.
a quarter hour later.
We've
Okay.
got promptness operating here, but we'll see.
Okay, we have about 20 people or so. I think we're doing good. All right, and I think more will join as we go. So welcome everyone. I'm going to introduce Anthony, although he probably doesn't need much introduction. And then I'm going to say a few words about Center Forums, and then we'll be off. So let me talk about Anthony a little bit. As we all know, maybe we don't all know that Ant is both an architect and an art historian, and known internationally as an expert on Frank Lloyd Wright. His recent book, Wright and New York, The Making of America's Architect, was critically acclaimed. It was a finalist in the Prose Awards for 2020. His first book, Frank Lloyd Wright and the Lost Years, established a chronicle of an architect's life and work in the teens and early 1920s. But in addition to his studies on Wright, his books have covered subjects from the history of design education at Harvard, to Central European architecture, to production housing in the suburbs. And I happen to know Anthony's also written a novel, which is not on this list here. His review essays are many. They've appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, Burlington Magazine, The New Criterion, and Casabella, among others. Anthony has been elevated to a Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He's a 3-time Fellow of the MacDowell Colony. He's a Fellow of the Baliasco Foundation, I guess, and Ailsa Mellon Bruce Senior Fellow at the National Gallery of Art, Center for Advanced Studies in the Visual Arts. He has received numerous grants from the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts. He was awarded the Wright Spirit Award from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy for his contributions to scholarship. Anthony is the Roland Gommel Resner Centennial Professor of Architecture at UT, where he began teaching in 1987. Anthony will retire in May 2020, just weeks from now, which makes a very auspicious and significant moment. Less known is that Anthony actually founded the school's PhD program in architecture, chaired its history program, and was director for the Center for American Architecture and Design from 1990 to 93. This is too small a forum, and I'm not the person to thank Anthony for his service to UT, to our school, and to architecture. Hopefully, there will be a better time and a place for that. So let me just say thank you to Anthony as a longtime friend and colleague for passing on to me the privilege of leading the Center for American Architecture and Design after he did, and before him, Larry Speck did. Thank you, Anthony. A personal note, although I am far from retiring, this is the last forum that I'll be hosting as the director of CAD. According to our records, we started doing them in 2004, which makes Center Friday Forum a tradition at least 16 years old, and maybe 20 because we started earlier. At 10 forums per academic year, that makes 160 to 200 sessions with about 100 from faculty and sometimes students presenting. These have been mainly in architecture, but also in interior design, planning, and landscape. Of course, the faculty have offered more than one forum, which is why their number is about, I'd say, 2/3 or a half. So I am very happy to announce that Center Friday Forums will continue for years to come. Under the new leadership of a faculty advisory board consisting of Fernando Lara, Martin Hetesh, Nerea Feliz, and Miriam Salas, and under the ever-capable managing director's hands of Leora Visotzky. Center Friday Forums, sometimes called Friday Lunch Forums, are when faculty and students try out new ideas in a sporting and supportive atmosphere. It's when we put ourselves in the kitchens of new thought about the environment, watch the chef, taste test the components, assess the potential of the results, raise questions, and leave invigorated. If we were in Battle Hall 101 right now, instead of online, I would raise a real free soda and sandwich in toast to all my colleagues and all the students who made Center Friday Forums the institution it is. And now to Anthony and to a talk called Transitions that promises to be absolutely thrilling. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. And first and foremost, congratulations on your wonderful and productive tenure running the center. I particularly appreciate what you've accomplished in the time that you've manned the helm. And I wish you personally much happiness and continued success as you maintain your role teaching and inspiring those of us in the School of Architecture. So
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm retiring after 33 years of teaching here, which in a way is a kind of graduation. And I thought that therefore I would make some remarks principally directed to architecture students, particularly those who are graduating like me, and to others. By architecture, I mean everything related to the built environment: planning, landscape architecture, historic preservation, interior design, history, as well as architectural and urban design. There should be no walls between these professions. And as you go forward into the future, you should dissolve barriers and expand the linkages between them. That you, in principle, are the students of the school. You are the sole reason that we're there. I read the other day in an architecture magazine some comments from an East Coast dean who said he wasn't about to paint an optimistic picture for his graduating students. I disagree. Despite our collective misery, I think there are reasons for optimism. We struggle with tragedy and death daily, but this is also a period of transition. Transitions are unsettling, but they are also exciting. Let's start looking at this transition with some of the immediate benefits of graduating. Welcome to the culture of architecture. Your studies have given you entree into a distinctive discipline with its own history and practices. It identifies you. You are now connected to multitudes around the globe who've had experiences similar to yours, whether they're at the Polytechnic in Milan, or Belleville in Paris, or the University of Melbourne. Another great benefit of architecture is that it offers many different niches for work. Keep that in mind. This is a field that encompasses a huge array of skills and expertise. Few individuals end up as lead designers. But architecture is a collective endeavor that can't exist without teamwork, without individuals making up that team. This may not be obvious at the moment. You start out worried and insecure. It's just human. But you should embrace your strengths, your unique abilities, identify them, and present them to any potential employer or client who asks what you can do for them. You will bring your skills to the challenges of the future. Environmental healing and architecture as support for the economically and socially disenfranchised will emerge as essential for millions of people around the globe. The emotional and psychological damage of the pandemic will be extensive. We need a new world, and you can provide the vision for it. This is your job, your opportunity. If we had any success in training you here, it was to make you aware of that fact. I am putting this forward not as some utopian fantasy, but as the global reality of the 21st century. Clearly, reports on the environment tell us factually that if we do not transform it, the planet will die. It is daunting, but what could be more thrilling and more liberating? Now, for me, being not only an architect, but an historian, helps put this moment into a broader perspective. The historical lens is especially valuable in helping people understand the dynamics of change, of how architects in the past have dealt with various sorts of personal, professional, environmental, and social transformations. When you step out of the moment and look back, you get a different perspective. You see, for instance, that recessions, economic depressions, and political upheaval occur periodically. In the late 18th century, despite the bloody events of the French Revolution, which lasted from 1789 to 1799, a fundamental shift occurred in architecture and art. Architects moved away from the Rococo style with its elaborate surface embellishments to a neoclassicism derived from the alleged purity of ancient Rome. It was a time of turmoil, but it freed architects like Etienne Louis Boulet and Claude Nicolas Ledoux to produce creative visionary works that have inspired us for 2 centuries and continue to do so. If we look back into the 20th century, at the ravages of the Great Depression, extending from 1929 into World War II, we see that economic and social distress required a fundamental rethinking of architectural production and its relationship to society. A sea change occurred as Art Deco, the first great, uniquely American modern idiom, gave way to a more socially responsive architecture represented by the international style. Change swept away the old to make way for the new, as the Depression itself was a protracted transition. By its end, the whole complexion of the century had changed and would lead to a post-war era of unprecedented prosperity. Not long after I graduated from college in 1971, there was a 15-month recession. It was generated by an international oil crisis, a stock market crash, and stagflation. Unemployment hit 9%. Jobs in architecture were scarce. In my early 20s, I managed with a modest lifestyle. My eye wasn't on money or job security, but on figuring out who I was. There are financial realities confronting many of you, but you too have time to sort out your lives. When I graduated from architecture school in 1981, 10 years later, another recession hit. The Iranian Revolution had exacerbated an energy crisis, and the resulting inflation, along with tight monetary policy, caused a financial debacle. This time, unemployment rose to 10.8%, and architecture was again hit hard. Sure, It was tough for new graduates, but people persevered, and many found positions as practices reopened. We were all in the same boat, then as now, and that solidarity was comforting. The historian's perspective also helps in looking at the fate of institutions. Most every school goes through transitions that unsettle students and faculty. Take a place like Harvard, my alma mater. You would think, as rich and prestigious as it is, that it never had a crisis, but not so. It has had several. From 1945 to 1952, conflict between the dean, Joseph Hudnut, and the chair of architecture, Walter Gropius, tore the school apart, as each tried to promote their own vision of architectural education. It was a protracted period of tension that the students must have felt. It ended in 1952 in the midst of a national economic recession, bad publicity, and massive budgetary cuts to school. But in the following year, under a new dean, the school began regaining its footing. It moved into new directions, instituting the first program in urban design and major innovations in landscape architecture. During the turbulence of the late 1960s, Harvard was a scene of countercultural activity. The students saw tremendous opportunities to reorient architecture away from formalism to a social agenda that they believed would improve society, provide more equity, justice, and well-being around the globe. Its students became politically involved. The famous strike fist, now a universal emblem, was designed by two Harvard architecture students and silk screened onto posters and t-shirts in the basement of the school. No pandemic infected millions as now, but it was a time of social chaos, of generational conflict, of bitter national division, of perpetual racism, and the Vietnam War. But the students felt hope, not despair. I know because I was one of them. I use Harvard as an example only to remind you that you, the students of this school, are not so different from those students, and that you are as well educated, as talented, and as equipped as any of your peers in Cambridge or elsewhere. Now, while I've been speaking mostly to the students out there, I also want to address our faculty and staff. Not only do you face new ways of teaching, disconnected from the physical presence of your students, but also the demoralizing news of no merit increases and certainly future budgetary cuts. Our university is in transition, with searches on for both a new president and a new provost. Those of us who've been here for decades have seen changes at the top and financial crunches. And with the eventual return to normalcy, we remember how fortunate we are in the School of Architecture. We appreciate the tremendous efforts of administrators, but we realize that in the most difficult moments, the strength of a school lies in the courage of its faculty to lead and to take responsibility. Administrators come and go, but a strong faculty provides continuity, direction, and community. The university will get through this, and as a result, may become more dynamic, more innovative, and more equitable than ever before. So in the end, there are grounds for optimism in this turbulent time of change. Don't forget, the world needs you. Transitions are unsettling, but also exciting, and architecture always rebounds. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for a truly inspiring and perspective. I guess the historian in you really brought to the fore the context we're in. Every crisis, though, is unique, is it not, Anthony? And I'm kind of wondering how you feel, in what ways this is not just one more. Maybe having started a conversation, other people should feel free to jump in. But Anthony, would you care to say something about that?
I think this is a different and unique situation. I think this may be, well, certainly it's the worst health crisis this country has experienced, that the globe has experienced in centuries. It's happened so suddenly that we barely can realize that as this concludes, life will be different. Our institutions will be different, and that rethinking that was required in the Depression, which lasted 10 years, will be required now. So it's not the same. But I think my point was a simple one, that these are hard times. These weigh on us emotionally, physically, in every respect. But it's important to somehow retain a strength of hope and optimism and vision for the future. That was the message I was trying to give.
Yeah. Well, let me invite anyone to unmute, even simultaneously, and get into the discussion.
Anthony, it's Alan. I have a question. And it follows a little bit on the change in Frank Lloyd Wright and tumultuous times, although everyone lives in their own version of tumultuous times. Wright, towards, we'll call it the second half or third quarter of his career, had a champion of Elizabeth Gordon, who saw a certain kind of architectural response to a certain kind of lifestyle that was emerging in the United States. I'm just wondering who you're reading right now in terms of looking for voices, editors, publishers, who keep an eye on the future and what we might need next.
Oh, it's a good question. I confess I've been reading retrospectively at different visions of the world at different moments in time. And some of my reading has been a bit of an escape, but a bit of an inspiration as well. I, in particular, have just picked up Baudrillard's book, America, which is an outsider's view of American culture, written some time ago, as a way of thinking about the future from the point of view of a sharp-minded French critic. And I picked up Baudrillard's America because it was mentioned in a book I'm reviewing by the Italian theorist Francesco Dalco on the Guggenheim Museum. It's a marvelous book, it's not too long. And at the end of this book by Dalco, one of Italy's leading historians, he said, wherever I've been in anything that I've studied and read about America, because he too is an outsider, I've kept this book by Baudrillard at my side. So I'm looking at a number of things. People have looked at America to think about ways of framing the future, in contrast to people who are contemplating or hypothesizing from the contemporary perspective where we will go.
Anthony, it's Juan. Sorry, my camera doesn't work. That's what you cannot see me, but I'm going to get a new computer because this one is very old and the camera stopped working last week. But thank you for, inspiring words. I was just curious, as you transition, where is all the energy going to go now that you have that you transition in the next phase of your life? What are the things that you have now in mind in terms of your intellectual interest, but your specific projects in terms of books and work and architecture? What are you seeing as your transition? As students are transitioning, you're transitioning to a very important new phase. What is the plan?
Well, my plan and I've had some time to formulate it, is to continue doing pretty much everything I've been doing, except I just won't be teaching formally anymore. I'll be continuing my research, continuing my writing. I will defer for the moment the pressure of writing a new book. Books, as my colleagues know, and I can see the faces of several of you who've written books, are demanding, even if you've written a bunch of them. I probably won't be writing books. I'll be writing some essays. I'll be working on a memoir. I'll be engaged with cultural life. I'll very much keep a toehold in Austin. I hope to retain my office where my archive is, and I'll continue the work in my archive. And I hope to continue to have informally many fruitful relationships with colleagues and students. I'll miss teaching. I'll miss the formality of contact with students, but I also think that I can continue in some way to assist modestly by being a kind of mentor. That's one of the things that the time I've been spending in New York has allowed. You know, we have a lot of graduates there, and just by chance, I'm in touch with them. They happen to be a pretty large cohort of women, but not exclusively. People need support. They can benefit from experience of a professional, of an educator, and I hope to continue in some way to be a mentor to others.
Well, I'm happy to know that you will be around. So we see this as a transition, not that Anthony is disappearing. So, you know, it's great to know. And I hope we can all benefit from the mentorship that you have provided all these years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan.
Hi, Anthony. You know, you talked a little bit in your talk about, the gropiest times at Harvard. And, this is was an era in which the role of architectural history really came, whether under question or under threat, in many different ways. If you think about what's happening now with architectural history, and particularly a lot of the conversations that have been taking place at this school, as well as at many other schools, with regard to decolonization, with regard to sort of like shifting away from the more monographic or chronological approach to looking, and as well as a typological approach, to looking at things in sort of a greater context in it. What do you see as changes coming for architectural history and the way that we need to think about architectural history in the future?
Well, I think the monographic chronological approach that was Eurocentric has been fading for a long time. It's certainly not how we've been teaching our survey courses in the School of Architecture, and that certainly wasn't true when I was teaching the survey on modern architecture. Already then, as of 10 years ago, the global perspective had entered. I think that I'm thrilled at the expansion of a global point of view and the expansion of new critical attitudes that my colleagues are leading and really are in the forefront of, that this is the most positive direction I can possibly imagine. I'm also aware that it's easy for people to set up a kind of straw man as if people still believed in an empty formalism run at the top by a bunch of old white guys. That kind of vision has certainly been dismantled and continues to be dismantled. So it's not, the attack on it is not new, but ongoing. And it's just refreshing to see the different perspectives in which the history of architecture is looked at these days. And I hope it only becomes increasingly more fruitful as part of the dialogue on where we need to go in the future.
And then I'm just going to share something that someone said about you to me right before I came to University of Texas. I was having dinner with Robert A.M. Stern, and those of you who know Bob knows a couple of things about him. One, he does not suffer fools gladly, and he is unbelievably opinionated and quite dismissive of pretty much almost anyone that he comes across. And anyway, so when he heard I was coming to University of Texas, he said, Anthony Alofsin, not a bad historian. So, and from Stern, that's pretty astonishing support.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I much appreciate that.
I want to use this moment of silence here just to raise a big toast to both Michael and Anthony. I was very touched by what Michael said in the beginning of this talk, and then very touched by Anthony's reading of the moment and his advice for us who now will keep carrying the load over here. And we, for sure, as Juan was saying, we are very happy to have both around. Michael, of course, for many, many years, but at the center, we will need your guidance for years to come. And Anthony, please stay around as much as possible to help us move forward. I mean, you created the PhD program 26 years ago, I believe, and your guidance will be very much appreciated in the new format, whatever format you decide to carry from now on. So thank you both. It's been a very quite emotional Center Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando.
Oh, well, thank you, Fernando. Let's see, am I on? I hope so. Anthony, you raised also some substantive points of discussion, which I don't know, has been on my mind, maybe everyone else's mind, as we try to like prognosticate what lies ahead for us, but also for architecture. Part of me, as someone who long ago tried to theorize cyberspace, which was an alternative to physical space, and imagined it sort of fleshed out as a place of dwelling and work and so forth, find it amazing that that actually we are propelled into it now by fear, fear of infection, fear of the world, fear of the air, fear of other people, fear of closeness, and find ourselves like thrown, if you will, into the world of Zoom, which in a peculiar way has a proto-architecture of its own. This grid of pictures on the screen, this strange, to use a phrase I heard recently, public intimacy, that we're all at home, and yet here we are in a sort of a public space. And I'm just wondering whether anything equivalent might have happened historically in the transition, maybe with the arrival of movies and mass transit, maybe earlier than that, the arrival of books and so forth. What are your feelings about media and architecture, and whether media are constituting an alternative to architecture itself?
Well, I hope that media isn't an alternative to architecture per se, but I think historically we can look back and see that in the 20s, already by the 2020s, visual media as films were inspiring people around the globe. Expressionist movies were drawing on film developments of the records of construction of Grand Central Terminal, for instance, which was seen as futuristic and utterly visionary. So I think that there's so many factors weaving into cultural transitions that it's hard to pull cinema out by itself. Even if we think that the constant shrinking of data storage and how that's affected our lives, and you reflect on 1987, there were floppy drives, and you spent a lot of time worrying about reducing your data so you could get it all onto this thing that was this big. But it's been fast, but it's been a gradual change. I think what we're experiencing right now is something that's so sudden that the magnitude of how it will transform our lives is not graspable. Just think how quickly we've had to adapt to Zoom, how many millions of people around the world are using it. I don't know, and I can barely even speculate, but it's certain that whatever the future contains, we've got to nurture the things that make us most human. And technology is neutral. Technology doesn't dehumanize us or make us more human. So the things that are humanizing become even more important. I was counting earlier this morning. I think I know personally 5 people who died in the last month. And it just makes you reflect on who and what is important. And that is relevant to those of us in the field of architecture. It reframes something and makes us move beyond our own personal and narcissistic, egocentric concerns to the world around us. So I hope that there's always a balance as technology takes whatever form it does, and the human spirit.
Well, I don't want to make it a dialogue. Yes, Alexandra.
Sorry, yeah, just a thank you and a quick comment. First of all, Anthony, I wanted to thank you for all your support in this, my first years at the UT. I'm relatively still a newcomer, and we've had many wonderful conversations, and you've helped me tremendously to understand how to become an author, how to think even about publishing a book. So I can't thank you enough for that, and I do hope that we can continue these conversations since you're going to have more time in the near future, and I hope they will become real, not virtual. A comment that comes to my mind is, you mentioned when you were talking about the crisis in the past, you mentioned those transitions from one formal style to another, and I wonder whether you have thoughts about this now, and whether you think that it's still about some kind of a formal shift or it's something else. I mean, we constantly keep on thinking, at least I keep on thinking about the kind of tension between the public space and the interior space. And it seems to be a discussion between more urban design and interior design. And somehow as an architect, you ask yourself maybe whether we're losing a little bit more of importance in this moment, where it's so much concentrated on understanding how to compensate for the lack of public space and what the meaning of the interior space right now is. I wonder what your thoughts about that are.
Well, from Vitruvius on, from the first treatise that we have in the Western tradition of the theory of architecture, the tension has been built in between art and science. And it's a conflict still very much with us. The framing of it shifts, as you've just described, between interior space, public space. And this tension is just fundamental to the discipline, to the engagement. And at times, what formalism has tended to do in the past is to give emphasis to the creator, as in the French cinema, the auteur theory, where it's all about the director. It's all about that creative artist personality. And our profession has been dominated by figures who were molded in that format. And their teaching and their influences continues to generate people who emulate, unconsciously or not, that kind of model, that architecture is all about stars and about ego and about, it's one way of defining the private personal domain. It's the domain of personal ambition. And it rubs rubs against the position of architecture as a profession, simply put, that's meant to better the lives of people. It's not about you. It's about making a better world. And it's not a binary that we want to get caught in. It's not either or, because the pleasure of it is the fact that we have the ability to create beauty. We have the ability to create places and spaces and experiences that move people and support their lives, that are transcendent, and it's gratifying to us. So the trick is to balance those worldviews, and a wise person would not get stuck on indoor, outdoor, public versus private, but to try to draw out the best in each and weave them together. Now, Alan asked a question about Frank Lloyd Wright. In his best moments, that's what he wanted to do, but he was always tripped up by his own ego in being effective, in effectively producing that. And one of the things, you know, he's such a large personality. I hate to say it, but in some ways a kind of Trumpian figure, not nearly as, well, I won't go there. But
no, go there, Anthony, go there.
Frank Lloyd Wright is a kind of whole cottage industry with a great, with lots of books and trinkets being sold in his name. But what people don't really address is, why did he have that arrogant ego that inhibited with him making the public realm in the way that he wanted to in his heart? And he couldn't do that. He couldn't transcend his own neediness because he had a kind of unresolved psychological problem. He had a chip on his shoulder. He could never deal with the burdens of his own dysfunctional family. That's the reality of who that man was. So he wasn't healthy in some ways, and that really was a great limitation. So that's why I use the word wise instead of healthy, that a wise person sees the duality and the pleasure of the duality. The pleasure, there's no conflict between public and private space, between inner and outer worlds. Our job is to unite them in a search for a kind of joy.
Thank you, Anthony. I hope it brings our departments closer together. The Department of Urban Planning, Architecture, Interior Design. I think it's a great opportunity to think about those issues all together. So yeah, it's great to hear that that's how you see it.
Well, I don't want to speak on Michelle's behalf. I'm not even remotely equipped to do that. But what I've heard many times is that her vision is a vision of unification, a vision of wanting to break down those barriers and to create unified collaboration among these fields. Personally, I'm very aware, even though I haven't been involved, I'm aware of changes in our curriculum, in our teaching, which are broadening the base. My own perspective is that when we start to have content within all of our courses, starting at the very beginning, that bridge these fields, that we will really start creating a more collaborative and more collective formation for all of our students.
Richard, I can't help thinking that you'd want to jump in.
Oh, I've just been.
Can I encourage you?
I'll try. I've been deeply moved. I knew it was going to be interesting just to hear Anthony, and I think a lot about all of you right now. And you know, Anthony in particular, it's his final semester, and you know, we all kind of have a plan of like how we'd like it to go. And you know, Anthony has been improvising like mad, and I'm sure doing it brilliantly with his courses. And so I was happy, you know, to see him pop up on the schedule. And Michael, I haven't heard the news before, you know, about your transition with the center, and you know, I share all of the accolades. The Friday sessions are, they're a wonderful thing, and I'm glad they will be continuing. And you've created a rich legacy for people to follow. So to have both of you, people who I admire greatly, and over the years, we've been stimulated by both of you. We've been able to have disagreements and different points of view, but it's been exactly what you're supposed to be doing at a university. So, I'm going through all this as well as trying to, to process these things. I will just say, first of all, a plug. Anthony's book about right in New York. For some people who don't, normally read history, you should read this book. It's short and it's brilliantly written, and it's so moving, and it gives a very powerful sense of this conflict Anthony was just describing, with Frank Lloyd Wright, a person that many of us struggle with because we admire his heart, and you just want to kick him for being such an asshole to so many people over time. And Anthony's given us a really more than just a picture of this architect, but of how he was operating in an amazing time in American history. And so, definitely go out and read it. Get this book. I was also been thinking, I was so fortunate when I came to Texas after being at an institution which was going through a civil war. I'm not sure if it was as violent as the war that Anthony described at Harvard, but it certainly was not pretty, and it was pretty ugly, in fact, the factions within the faculty. And I was able to, had the privilege of eventually getting here. And Anthony, with others, but Anthony's leadership, created a vision for what we were going to try to do as a group, as historians. Now, this is a long time ago. It was 95 when I got here, and so the world for architecture and the mission for architectural history is different than it was at that time. But at that time, there was a real commitment passed on from Dean Box to Dean Speck about history and research were to be an integral part of an architect's education in the School of Architecture. We were proud at that time to have a more rigorous architectural history set of requirements than almost any school in the country at that time. There was a vision for that we weren't going to try to do everything in architecture. We weren't really going to be doing medieval architecture. We weren't specializing in antiquity, but we were going to be really, really strong, in the from the late early modern period. That was my part initially, through the 20th century as it was. And we were going to try to create as rich a approach to already, I think, Anthony, I certainly believe this, that architectural history needed to be redone. The old monographic approach that both Anthony and I had been educated in was clearly unraveling and unwieldy, and was also just missing so many pieces. And it was an exciting proposition, to come to join this this project, for years. Then there was the theory requirement with a still, unwieldy role of what is the role of theory in an architecture school? What is the role of history and theory? What is the relationship? What is it to architectural pedagogy? And over the years, of course, we've picked at it and took it apart and struggled with it in different ways, and it's still an evolving thing. But I was very privileged to get to Texas when I got to Texas, and I'd known Anthony before I got here to Austin, but it was a good thing, and Anthony and I will continue. Actually, we may actually have time to see each other virtually, or at least our email correspondence, more frequently than we did when we were in the trenches working. And maybe the same with Michael. It's just not having to go to meetings all the time. You have more time to think and to read, and more questions to be asked and to be discussed. And so that's what I look forward to. Wherever we are scattered, we all find a way to stay in
Richard,
touch.
thank you. Yeah. Well, we have I don't know, 5 or so minutes left. Would anyone like to?
Well, I don't want to, Michael, I think you need to have the last words at this. So
Okay.
I'll do the penultimate on this. And
Okay.
I think for Michael and for Anthony, this event was not what we saw as your Festschrift. In going forward, that we're hoping that we're going to have an opportunity to fete and celebrate the accomplishments and the legacy that you've left here, Anthony. And of course, Michael, you're still going to be here and you're still going to be actively involved, but nevertheless, the incredible mark that you've left on CAD and your leadership, which has really been absolutely instrumental in how this has become, the intellectual voice of the school. It's been so important. This is not the venue at this moment to, be able to share those things. Those are big events, big celebrations, big thank yous that we need to have for the both of you. And
no rush, no rush.
And I'm counting on the fact that we're going to be able to do that at some time in the future. But I will say this has given me an idea that, particularly in hearing the most recent part of the conversation where Richard chimed in, and also knowing that both Fernando and Benjamin are here listening, that it would be nice if we could do kind of a day symposium looking at the history of history at the University of Texas at Austin and the role that it played here. Could be part of what we think about as some of the many ways that we don't let this conversation stop at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on August 24th. That we see that as something continuing forward. But, it's, I don't want to say goodbye, and I'm not going to, because we're gonna continue on in these conversations and continue seeing each other. But what a treat for, I think, our last CAD a session. Is that
it is.
One of the, what a treat. And it's one of the reasons we'd really hoped that you would agree to do this, Anthony, as we knew that of all the ways to close out what has been a really difficult semester, to have your steady, thoughtful, reasoned, and aspirational message was really important. So thank you for that. And thank you, Michael, for everything that you do.
Here, Anthony. I don't know whether you can clap in Zoom, can you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the last forum of the year. Hopefully in the fall, we'll be back in real space. Let's just hope. If not, we'll be back in the land of Zoom, maybe doing it better. Thank you, Anthony, for a great talk, and don't go away. Stick around.
Thank you all for this opportunity, and thank you for inviting me, and stay safe and stay well.
Bye.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So